Hello, all, and welcome to COVID Conversations here on WNCU by way of Zoom here on WNCU 90.7 FM. I'm Kimberly Pierce Cartwright, your News and Public Affairs Director, and we're using this platform here on Zoom to talk about the virus and how it's affecting our world. And I have the good pleasure of having the Honorable Cheri Beasley, the first African American female Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, as my guest today. I am over the moon. Interview. Hello, Your Honor.
Thank you, Kimberly, so much for having me today.
Oh, my good pleasure. And I want to talk about just a bunch of things that relate to you. First of all, it took 200 years for North Carolina to have an African American woman in this position. How do you feel at this juncture in your career?
You know, I've now served as Chief Justice for almost a year and a half. And I'll tell you, Kimberly, when I was appointed by the governor in February of last year, I received words of congratulations from literally people from all over the world. It was absolutely amazing. And it was amazing to me because so many people in their own way felt that this accomplishment was in some way a victory for themselves. And so it feels great. It feels great that we have that global kinship, that there are lots of places in this world and in this nation where there are not African American women in service on state high courts. And so it feels great, but I think more than how it feels is that it's important to make sure that I am, to the very best of my ability, serving the people of North Carolina well, and bringing a different level of consciousness to our courts.
As Chief Justice, Your Honor, you lead the entire judicial branch of government. That's more than 6,500 officials and employees. How do you do it?
Well, it's lofty, that's for sure. I also lead the Supreme Court of North Carolina, so I'm hearing the same cases as my colleagues. But we have great people in our courts. We have more than 300 court facilities across the state. And so, especially during this pandemic, as we are having this COVID conversation, it's been really important for court leaders locally to be willing to pull together and to follow my emergency orders along the way. And I instituted the first one in March of this year, and we continue to do that to try to keep people safe on the one hand, but still continue the work of the courts on the other.
So to segue into that thought, then how has COVID-19 changed the scope of how the court system works in the state? What have you had to do to make sure that the wheels of justice, if I may, continue to turn?
Well, COVID has greatly impacted the courts. On a given day in Durham County, for instance, there might be thousands of people in the courtroom or on the court docket or in the courthouse. And we just cannot, for the sake of public safety, health and welfare, operate at that level. So we are at a place where we are hearing cases all over the state, but we're not hearing cases at the same level that we had. One of my emergency orders has halted jury trials at this point. I was greatly concerned that we were asking people, many of whom are immunocompromised, to come into our courthouses to be chosen for a jury. Juries sit shoulder to shoulder in a box, and it just didn't make sense. So right now we have our local judges and DAs and folks across the state coming up with plans with how they can do that safely. In a place like Durham, it's a little easier. In some places, they don't have the facilities, so they're actually having to use civic auditoriums to hold jury trials to make sure that there's social distancing and that kind of a thing. So I'm looking forward to the day that we can resume jury trials and hopefully find some sense of normalcy in terms of getting back on pace and hearing our cases.
So how is technology playing a role in all of this?
Well, before the pandemic, I had worked really hard with the legislature to get funding for e-courts We're still going to do e-courts. I'm excited about the fact that it will completely transform the way that we do our business in the courts. It will transform the way the public uses our courts. People shouldn't have to physically come to the courthouse for so many of the things that matters that they may have. But, we've been having virtual hearings and we continue to hold those, some telephonic hearings. And so we would not have been able to proceed at the level that we have been able if it had not been for technology.
All right. So COVID-19, of course, is in the mix as protesters are taking to the streets across America, across North Carolina. Can you talk about for me the intersection of the justice system and protests around the country after deaths of African Americans are questionable, or the deaths happened under questionable circumstances? And I'll call their names, like people like Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, among others.
Well, the intersection really is a very powerful one. And right after George Floyd died, I was the first Chief Justice in the nation to publicly speak out about how we could ill afford to ignore the rallying cry of North Carolinians, who are thousands of whom have been and continue to protest across North Carolina. And certainly there are thousands of people across this nation who continue to rally against racial disparities. And those disparities exist in corporations and in athletics. And I could not discount that people are rallying against racial and gender discrimination in our courts. As the Chief Justice, it's my responsibility as the leader of our courts to set the standards. And we are being responsive. We frankly had been before George Floyd died, but George Floyd's death really gave us an opportunity to really bolster some of the work that we've been doing. And so it's been important to me to make sure that we are acknowledging some very difficult truths about the history of this nation and this state, that we are acknowledging that the ways in which we have our own biases impact the outcomes of the cases that come before our courts. And so I'm thankful that court leaders have been on board. So many people in North Carolina and across the nation have said to me, I knew we needed to do something, but I just didn't know what. So the fact that we've been able to come together, and I'm starting a commission on racial and gender equities in North Carolina, just centered on courts and how we do our work. I'm so excited about that. And soon after I made my statement, I was featured in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. So this is serious business. The work of the courts is about people's everyday lives, and we cannot discount the importance of our work and our commitment to making sure that justice is served inside of our courts as well as outside of our courts.
Can you talk a little bit more about the commission that you've set up? What would that task be?
We're still in the process, and it should be formally set up by the end of this month. But we really are looking at, I don't want to say re-educating judges and court leaders, because really it's educating. All of us have had long-held thoughts and biases about the people who come before us. And to the extent that those are racially grounded, we just have to deal with it. We have to call it what it is. And it is not fair to the people who come before our courts if even when not intended, if the outcome is in some way impacted by a discrimination, we just have to deal with it, and we have to acknowledge it, and we have to make critical changes. It does require us to have very serious and difficult conversations and acknowledgments in order to do this. But I'm thankful that we have a committed group of folks who are ready to move forward on this. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I'll also say that during this pandemic, it's been important to me to be thinking about the fact that so many people are challenged around the pandemic, and all of that is compounded by what we see around the heightened racial tensions. And so long ago, when I became the Chief Justice, we founded a Faith and Justice Alliance. And little did we know that we would really be needing to call on it right now, where we're training clergy to identify legal issues and refer those folks to lawyers at no cost to them. Places of worship are holding legal clinics and addressing legal issues. These are people who will never, ever be able to hire lawyers. So if people would like more information about this alliance, please go to NC Faith and Justice Alliance, ncfaithandjusticealliance.org. And, I have a COVID-19 small business and nonprofit initiative to help folks who are facing dissolution and bankruptcy during this period of time. We've got a guide and file program that allows for people to be able to go online. They can do the filings for evictions and for absolute divorce and for domestic violence protective orders and for small estates and for some other things. I mean, you can go in, populate the form and send it to the court, take it to the court, file it, and present it to the judge. So access to justice has been so important. I mean, more than 50% of the people who come to our courts are not represented by a lawyer, and they never will be. And so it's important to make sure that the business of the court is processed in a way so that people understand it and truly have access to it.
So I was going to ask you about, as Your Honor, the Chief Justice, like maybe a few of your top initiatives as Chief Justice. So can you maybe run down a list of things that you think are the most important in North Carolina judicial government?
I do think addressing racial and gender disparities head on is core. And so I'm excited about the fact that we're doing that and that we have willing folks to do that. I think the Faith and Justice Alliance is game changing. It's amazing the partners that we've been able to come up with all over the state. And really, we would love to have more to be a part of that. The need is great. And accessibility to our courts. And so the guide and file where people can go. There's another website, ncfairchance.org, ncfairchance.org, if your driver's license is revoked. And North Carolina is the 9th most populous state in the nation. We've got a population of roughly 10 million. About 1 million people have their driver's licenses revoked, not because they broke the law, but because they were unable to pay the fines and fees that were assessed at the time of judgment. And so those fines and fees snowball over the years, and you look up and people's licenses have been revoked for 5 and 10 and more years down the line. You can go to this website, ncfairchance.org, to look up to determine whether or not you are eligible to have your license restored. In so many areas across the state, I have been leading the way with our DAs and our judges to help people have, and we've had thousands of people who have had their driver's licenses restored. Access to justice is not just nomenclature. It has to be a stark practicality and reality for people that when they come to our courts, they can get the solutions that they need. And so for me, my primary responsibilities, it seems to me, is to address the racial and gender disparities. But also, when people come to the courts, they may not be pleased with the outcome, but they should believe that what happened with them was fair and impartial. And the prior Chief Justice commissioned a study which made lots of findings, one of which was that more than half of the North Carolinians do not have trust and confidence in our courts. We can't just ignore that. We must address it. And so that's my charge as Chief Justice.
And finally, I want to ask you about this other work that you're doing. You're going around to historically Black colleges and universities on tour. So can we talk about that tour? And North Carolina Central University is one of the benefactors of your expertise. So if you could talk about that, and by the time people see this interview, you will probably have come and gone from North Carolina Central University, but I'm sure your tour will continue. So what is that tour all about?
Let me first tell your listeners, Kimberly, that I am an associate alumnus of North Carolina Central University. I never attended school there, but I've always been dedicated to the mission. I've been working with the law school for many, many years and really feel very passionate about supporting the students there. And so that's number one. Number two, it's important for all of us to be having constructive conversations. HBCUs, I think, in some ways have been highlighted because of Kamala Harris's prominence. But the reality is, for those of us who've been around a long time, we've always known the star quality of HBCUs. I'm excited about the fact that our tour will launch at North Carolina Central University, a place that has historic measure, not just in North Carolina, but in the nation. in terms of not just educating students, but in scholarship and in research, and in every single other way, benevolence. And so we've got to have these conversations because this is an election year. And the one thing that we want people to know is that North Carolina Central University will not be discounted. It is strong. She is powerful. She's committed to educating a generation of students who will move and lead and change the communities around them. So I'm excited to be a part of these conversations. I want people to know more about the courts. We're hearing so much. I mean, there was court TV and judge shows and all that. But now the media is starting to talk more about arrests and court shows. And so I think it's important for us to be having that conversation. As your Chief Justice, justice will look different. And it's important for me to be having conversations in a way that other Chief Justices have not. And so I am a member of this community. And so I'm delighted to have these conversations.
Well, will you call some of the names of the HBCUs where they'll see your face?
I will tell you the ones that I can know of at this time. I know we have others signing on. We never anticipated this kind of interest. We know we will be going to North Carolina A&T, Elizabeth City State University, Johnson C. Smith, Fayetteville State University, and Winston-Salem State University. I understand that there are others who are interested, so we will see. But I will go anywhere. I love students. I so much appreciate the work that the faculty and the staff at the administration do at NCCU, but at all the universities. It is a heavy lift, not because the students are not talented, but you over-prepare them to make sure that they are more than ready to face the challenges of the world and to succeed in every single aspect of their lives.
Your Honor, Chief Justice Cheri Beasley, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Kimberly. Go Eagles.
Yes. Go Eagles. And good luck to you on tour. And thank you. Yes. And thank you, audience, for watching and listening to COVID Conversations here on WNCU 90.7 FM. Till next time.